So I'm Jonathan. I'm not Gail, as rumours earlier might have suggested to you. I run a PowerShell user group down on the south coast, Southampton, Portsmouth. So if you're in that area, come and talk to me about that. So this session is going to be demo heavy. You'll be pleased to know. There's no particular need for you to note anything down if you can't keep up with some of them. All of the demos are already on my GitHub account, so you can find them there. So the theme of this session, we're going to be looking at different types of data, and particularly when I've done PowerShell training for people who are new to the language, even with PowerShell at sort of 10-year maturity now, is they find it a little confusing and surprising that some sort of fairly basic data types are not covered out of the box. So the kind of theme we're going to look at is, should we use built-in cmdlets? Are they even existing there for us? And sometimes for more advanced scenarios, should we do something else? So I'm going to cover off quickly these 6 different types of data that you might meet in your daily life. So we're going to look at text files, CSV, Excel, XML, JSON, and YAML. That should be enough. And we're going to look at, should we use built-in cmdlets? Sometimes there might appear to be built-in cmdlets that are the best things to use, but might not be the best idea. My clicker stopped working. Sometimes we might need to drop into a little bit of .NET for some more advanced use cases. We also, if there isn't support, we might have to drop out to the community and find some external PowerShell modules to make our lives a bit easier. And also a couple of gotchas from my experiences teaching and in the field. So without further ado, let's move to text files. So something you might have to use quite a lot. Out of the box, we've got good old get content. And then we can also use select string if we need to search through particular files. And we've also got some .NET stuff available to us for more performance type things. So let's have a look at some code. So I've got this very simple text file here, example 1, with just 10 lines of text. And if I pull up my text file in, so if we need to read that text in, we can use get content, and that brings that text file into us for PowerShell. But what do we actually get? So you might think we get strings, but we actually get an array. So if we look what we have, we've actually got 10 items, not 1. So knowing that we've got an array, we can use typical array notation to pick something out that we want to work with. So here we're going to pick actually line 4, even though it's 3, because we start at 0. And we can also use some other standard PowerShell things for manipulating that text. So where object, if we want to filter through that and match particular things. We've got replace if we want to change any of that text. And get content also provides us with a whole host of options via its parameters. So if we just want to pick the first 3 lines, we've got total count 3. We can get the last 3 lines. We've also got an equivalent from Linux tail-f. If you've got a log file and it's changing data in it and you just want to see those changes live in your console, we've got the wait parameter. We can use that. And also we've got this raw parameter. So rather than bringing the text in as multiple lines, we can bring in the whole thing as one thing. So if we bring this in this time, it tells us we've got a string. And if we look at the count of how many things we've got 1. And the length of it, 158. So 158 characters. So if you need to work with that text in its entirety, that's one thing you can do. Get content may not always be the best thing for you, though, even though it's the obvious one there. If you're working with particularly large files, so say maybe a couple of gigs worth of log file, get content will read that file entirely into memory, which may not be the best thing on the system you're using. So in that case, we've got to drop out into .NET. PowerShell does make this fairly straightforward for us to do. So if you know the kind of thing you're looking for, or Google up and can find something, we can create a new object with a path to a text file here. I haven't got a massive text file to use here, but we could then cycle through that and you'll get better performance. I mentioned earlier select string, so kind of like if you're a Linux person, again, you're like a grep, you can search through some text. In this case, so we use select string, we give it a path. You'll notice a wildcard in a path, so if you need to search through a whole load of text files for a particular pattern and find which of those contain that data, it will return all of these and it will tell us which files brought that back for us and what line in that text file is there. So that's reading stuff in. Oh, and I've got a link here for if you're some more details around that performance with large text files. Okay, if we want to write stuff out to a text file, we've got out file. That seems the obvious choice. We've also got set content and add content. So which of those should we use? There's a few differences. So let's say I've got some data I want to work with here. This is a here string if you're not familiar with that. So kind of the same thing where I was using that raw parameter. You'll get the same experience if you make a here string. So there's funny kind of syntax, an @ sign, and the quote marks at the beginning and the end. Okay, and very simply, I can use out file, get that data out into a text file, and I can do the same thing with set content. So slightly different parameter names, file path, path, but pretty similar experience so far. One gotcha to look out for is if you're in a scenario where you've got a text file, you want to read it in, make some changes and write back out to the same file, then get content will lock the file and won't let you access it while you're in that pipeline. So in this example here, what we're trying to do is read content in, replace certain text in it, and set that content out. If you do that without these brackets here, you'll get an error and say the file's locked. So that's something to watch out for with get content. Out file doesn't have that issue. Add content is effectively an append. So if you want to add some text to the end of a file, you can just drop it out like that. Encoding. So anyone have issues with encoding different files across different operating systems? Yeah, yeah. Special characters, yeah, yeah. So these, if you only ever work with people on Windows desktops editing these files, and you're in a completely Windows environment, you'll never have a problem. I'm currently on a project where encoding is the bane of my life because we've got Windows and Mac developers editing files. They're given to automation systems on different operating systems and passing these files down to both Windows and the various flavors of Linux systems. All it takes is for one person to change something slightly, and we're looking through a 200-line text file where a dash looks like a dash but isn't actually a dash. The computer sees it as something else. So you need to be careful with encoding. Set content, and in fact both of them have this encoding parameter, so you can change from the default. So the default for set content is ASCII. We can change that if we want to UTF-8. So if I do that here, grab my text and dump it out to this file and go and have a look at that file, and we need number 5. We can see down here we've got UTF-8 with BOM. Okay, not BOMB, as they tend to cause problems with my project, but BOM, by order mark. Now that is interesting because in Linux the default is UTF-8 with I've lost my things here. UTF-8 with no BOM. So, and there's none of these, neither set content nor out file enable you to create a text file without the BOM. So this can cause problems. To do that, we need to use some .NET. So here's that familiar thing again from the previous example. We can create a system.txt UTF-8 encoding as false. And if I create this file, and now have a look at number 5 with any luck, we now have UTF-8 with no BOM. That was a little more tricky, but worth knowing about if you need to do that. Okay, so what's the difference? There's the locking is the difference between the two. There's encoding. So out file by default is a UTF-16. Set content is ASCII, so that can cause a bit of difference. Be aware of that. Also formatting. So if you take get child item, so a dir of a directory, and pipe it into the two different commands, you'll get a different experience because they format things differently. So if you use out file, you'll get your text file that looks like this. And if you use set content, it will look like this. So something to be aware of. Okay, there's also some other differences if you're creating empty files. Each has got some other extra parameters. I've got a link here for a full rundown on all of that. So that's text files. Another thing to be aware of, there are other commandlets in PowerShell which generate files in a type of text. For instance, new module manifest creates a manifest file for your module, and they all have different encodings, which can cause quite a lot of confusion. So if you've ever used new module manifest to create a file for your module, you may have noticed if you then use git that it sees it as a binary file and you can't see when you have the changes, which is quite annoying. So you might want to change that, the encoding of that. There's some discussion. So PowerShell 6, they've realized that this is now quite an issue, and they're talking about having a new automatic variable, PS default encoding, and setting it by default to my good friend UTF-8 no BOM. Okay. Part of the reason behind this is the whole cross-platform story of PowerShell version 6. And this means we would get a consistent experience with our Linux friends who typically have the default encoding of UTF-8 no BOM. Unfortunately, I'm beginning to know a bit too much about this topic. However, if you really want to, you would be able to set the default encoding to Windows Legacy. So if you really want to keep this mishmash of encoding types, that will be possible. If you look on GitHub at that link there, there's a whole discussion about it and what they're planning to do and looking for feedback. So let's move on. CSV, classic example when you're first learning PowerShell, loads of examples around that. There's not really a whole lot of interesting stuff here too much, other than watch out if your CSV file doesn't have a header. I'll have a quick look at that. So if your CSV file doesn't have a header, you can generate one for it with the header parameter. Otherwise, it's very straightforward. Import CSV out of the box. That's the best thing to use. You can use it with CSV files with different delimiters. I'm not quite sure what a a file with the semicolons called like a semicolon separated value file, but you've got an option there to use different ones. So that's one of the easiest ones to work with. If you want to write data out to a CSV file, we've got the opposite, export CSV, again the best one to use. The thing that trips people up most at first is, and I'll show you this, is if you use it with no parameters at all. So in this first example, get service, I'm going to pick a few properties, export those to a CSV file, and then let's have a look at the result. You see we get this really weird first line type, what the heck is this? And you get the type of the object that you've piped out as the first line in your CSV. Typically no one really wants that. I'm not quite sure why they first had it as a default, but it's a bit too late to change now. So what you can do, very simple, and get used to doing this, is add this no type information to the end of your command. You won't get that anymore. Okay, if you search for the CSV commandlets, you'll notice we also have this convert from CSV and convert to. This confuses people again a little bit. So what's the difference between that and import and export? And these are for if you want to work with CSV type data in your PowerShell session as it is. And this can be quite handy. An example of that is, let's take a native Windows tool that can, if we give it a switch, and quite a lot of them have this, we can produce output in CSV type format. So Who Am I is a long-time Windows tool. If we fire that up with the CSV output, we get something that looks like this, which is lots of commas. And if we pipe that into convert from CSV, we suddenly get this, something with headings and a lot easier to work with. So we can combine native Windows tools that are kind of becoming a bit more legacy with PowerShell and work with it in our normal familiar way. If you really want to, you can convert stuff in your session to a CSV style, which kind of looks like this. So that's CSVs. It's one of the easier ones to work with. Okay, so then we come on to Excel. So Microsoft, you would imagine, would have support for working with possibly the most commonly used file type in companies that often runs a lot of companies based on really important Excel files. 10 years down the line, there is still no native support for working with Excel files in PowerShell. So what we can do, and there's a few of these out there, is the community. Various people have made tools, commands for working with Excel. So if we're on PowerShell 5 or later, we can install stuff straight from the gallery. So in this case, I'm using a module out in the community slightly confusingly called Import Excel, which actually does do a whole lot more than just importing stuff into Excel. But one of the things it gives us is the Import Excel command.
Does that require Excel to be installed, or is that
Good point. Thank you for reminding me. So there are some out there which use COM objects, which requires Excel to be installed on the system. The one I'm demoing here doesn't require Excel to be installed on your system, so which is particularly handy because you don't really want to put Office on your servers or wherever you're running it, and in some versions I don't think you can even install it anyway. So I use this one. It's pretty good. So if we have a look, get command module, have a look and see what's available to us. Scroll down. Okay, we've got all of these commands available to us from that module. So a whole load more than just import and export. You can do some pretty fancy stuff in here. So I've got a very simple Excel spreadsheet, 3 columns, some data. I want to use that data in my PowerShell session. All I need to do, having installed that module, is as simple as import Excel worksheet. Which worksheet do I want to use? So it supports multiple worksheets, and the path to that file. Okay, and there's my data, apples, pears, oranges, and I can then start working with that data just as if I brought it in from any other type. Sorry, yeah. Over here first, yeah.
I was just saying I certainly used that 3 years ago. I had to bank my own using COM objects.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty cool once you find out you don't have to install Excel anymore. Yes, sir, over here.
What's the type of that data now?
Let's have a look. Okay, it's an array of data. So that's importing from files. Whoops, wrong way. Okay, how about if we want to generate some Excel files? Okay, we've got export Excel. Okay, so it's as simple as getting our data and then piping it to export Excel. If I do that, I'll get something which is in Excel, but it's not particularly nicely formatted. So there's a whole bunch of parameters you can use to make that look a bit nicer. So in this example here, we can name the worksheet that we want to use. We can also do some stuff around auto size and a whole bunch of other things. We'll have a quick look at this one. So I've done a get service, pick some properties, export to Excel, and you can see, you might see right down the bottom, I can name these tabs down here, and I can also, I've effectively done the auto fit column width to nicely space out those ready to send off to some manager type. Okay, quick tidy up. So I'll show you one other thing which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to grab some data. I can also create charts. So as part of the module, we've got a new Excel chart. This doesn't actually create the chart itself, but it can creates the definition of a chart. So I can pick a particular chart type. I can set the header, the X and Y range of data, and go and create it. Now, in the previous session, Jeff told you about splatting if you were in here, so that's cool. I don't have to explain that. But this could be quite a long command to type out here. But what I've done, I can grab these parameters here, store them in a hash table, and then this becomes a little bit easier to read. So export to Excel with all of those parameters and values. And then I'm going to create a table and use the definition of that chart. And hopefully when it opens, there we go. Pretty easy to take that data and create some nice looking tables and charts. The power all comes from that module which other people have made for us. So that's CSV files. Moving on, so XML. This is one which quite often confuses people because there are commandlets called import CLI XML and export CLI XML, not import XML. So straight away there's some confusion with the naming. These have been here since PowerShell 1, and typically these are used to serialize and deserialize objects. So you can take an object, save the definition of that out to a file, and later on bring that back in, which is not really the kind of thing most people do particularly often. And we're really looking to work with XML type data that we might have in a file or be getting from a web-based system. So instead, we either have to use some .NET, so they're the new object, and then well, here this system.xml XML document, we've got to create one of these. Or we can use, in a slightly more friendly way, an XML type accelerator. Once we've got that data in, we've got a couple of different ways we can work with that data. So if you're familiar with XPath, if you've worked with XML in other languages, there's full support for that. Or we can use what is kind of referred to as object.notation. So have a look at that. There's a link there with a good comparison between the two. So reading XML in, let's just have a quick look at my example XML file. Actually, I don't want that one, excuse me, that's those. We will start here with example 2. So I've got a very basic XML file, just defines some food on a breakfast menu, and each item's got some properties, a name, price, description, calories. To bring that data into PowerShell, I can create one of these system XML documents, okay, which returns to me something that looks like this, okay. What we actually then need to do is use the load method. So something, again, when I'm teaching training, as we don't get onto particularly quickly, I'm using methods and properties in PowerShell. Typically we're sticking with the nice friendly cmdlets earlier on, but here we need to use the load method of this object. So in this particular case, it takes one parameter and we need to give it the full path to where our XML file is. Once I use that, bring it in, I've now got right at the bottom here this breakfast menu, so it's loaded that in for us to use. The alternative, which I personally find slightly more friendly, is this XML type accelerator. So we use our good friend from earlier, get content, to read data in from that XML file, because essentially it is just a text file. And then we can let PowerShell do the hard work for us, and we just say, this content that's coming in is in Excel format, and I want you to handle it that way, please. And we get the same thing. And if you look at what we've got, oops, don't want to do that. We've got an Excel document. Excuse me, XML document. I briefly mentioned XPath. If you haven't seen that before, it's this slightly obscure looking syntax. Some people like it, some don't. If you're familiar with that already, you can use it. It's a way to pick out particular elements from your XML. So for example, we can use, again, we've got to use these methods. Select nodes or select a single node and give it an XPath, okay, and we can pick out the data from that. There's a cmdlet select XML, which is built in, and that fully supports XPath, so you can just give it your XPath there like that if you want to work with it that way. I quite like this alternative method. So this is object.notation, and we're kind of drilling down through the XML file. So here, if we know the levels, having looked at the file that we want to drill down through, we can go and pick these out. And once we've done that, or with either method, we can then start doing filtering or whatever to get closer to actually what we want to work with. Also, it's possible your XML might not be coming from a file, could be coming from a web service, or you might want to generate it yourself. Again, just get that text in, and we can use the XML type accelerator and to bring that in there. And that's my good friend the here string again. You can do that method if you need to generate some XML within your session. So that's bringing XML data in. If we want to write data out, we've got to either use pretty much got to use that save method of our XML document object. And again, we can use those two different methods if we need to manipulate the data before we're saving it. So let's have a look at some of those. So if I generate this XML here, okay, to get that out into a file, I've got to go XML4 is my variable, .save, and then a path. Okay. What we could do, and you could potentially do this for all of the methods, is make a function which handles that for you, and then use that so it looks like you're working in a slightly more typical PowerShell way. So I've made a function here, out XML. All it does is brings in an XML document and the name of a path. And then I'm using that save method, and I'm going to do some nice output as well. So that then means our code becomes a little bit easier to read, because we've got pipeline support, and it looks a bit more friendly because this out XML is fairly obvious what that does, and I can use that instead. If we need to change the data before we're exporting it into a file, again, you can use the XPath method and then set a property here. So if I pick this particular one, Belgian waffles, the price is $7.95. I can change it like this to $8.95, and that's how you can manipulate the data. You can also do the same thing with that dot notation. So filter down and find what you're looking to change, and then just set it to be equal to something else. There's a whole load of other methods on that new document object. So if we need to add a whole new node, we've got create element. We then have to use, so what that does is creates the definition of an element. If we have a look at what that food variable actually contains, it looks like that, and I meant to do it like this first. Excuse me. So again, a bit like that new XML document, we create an element first, and we populate it with our properties, and it will actually look like what we need. We then use the append child method on what we've been created, and with any luck, we now have an additional entry serial at the bottom of our XML data. There's a whole bunch of other of these methods. We could be here way past lunch looking at these. We've got clone node if you want to copy one that's already there. We've got insert after if you want to put it in a particular place in that XML file. We can also generate a whole section of new XML code like this, like we did earlier, and use the append child method to add that there. If we want to remove stuff, we've got a remove child. This is slightly more fiddly looking, and this kind of thing is crying out for making your own functions. So if you're working with this kind of a lot, I would suggest it might be something you want to think about rather than trying to remember all this syntax all the time.
Why did that have to be typed to void? No.
This just makes the output slightly nicer, I think, if I remember from when I made the example. But yeah, it's a bit strange. It's not particularly easy to read. As you can see, you already had a question. If you had a nice function which just said remove node, there's no explanation needed on what's happening. So that's XML. JSON, you'll be pleased to know, is a lot easier story because we've got built-in commandlets. So we've got convert from JSON, and we'll also look at a minute convert to JSON. So again, we can use get content to read data in from a file and convert it from JSON. Or we might be getting something from a web service. So this is a really easy one to work with. let's bring up the examples. So let's say I've got an example set of JSON data. In fact, so here I've got an ARM template from Azure, which is in JSON. You might be familiar with working with those. You can bring that into PowerShell, simply get content, the path to your file, and then pipe it into convert from JSON, and it will do the hard work for you. And that's converted into an object that we can now work with. And similar to XML, we can drill down through that with our object.notation and pick out various properties or whatever we want to do with it. This example, let's say I'm getting data from a web service. So I can use, there's a few commandlets you can use, but I'm using invoke web request. I've got a web link, which is API for GitHub on my repos, and then I pipe that straight into convert from JSON. Hopefully we've got some stuff there, yep. And once I've got that data, those are the repos currently in my GitHub account, so you can grab stuff from any web service that gives you a JSON response and easily work with that. If I want to write stuff out to JSON file, convert to JSON, again, really easy to use. We'll convert that data, but remember it's a convert, it's not an export, so you still got to do the work to actually get that out into a file. So we can use outFile, or you could use set content to do that. So one thing to watch out for here is a gotcha. So let's just do again a dir, get child item. I'm going to convert that to JSON and dump that out to a file. Okay, let's do that. Have a look at the file, and we get some slightly confusing stuff in there. So if I get to line 54, this one here, you'll see that we've got what looks like, remember back in Excel, we've got one of the, CSV, we've got one of these type information things again. That's because by default, convert to JSON only works at a depth of 2. So if you've got JSON data that goes down quite far in depth, you get this kind of behavior. And what you actually have to do is specify the depth that you want to go down to. So here, if we change that depth to 3, no, I didn't specify it in the first example. Here, I'm actually specifying how far I want to go. And now go and have a look at that file. You can see credential has now been expanded to this. So this is kind of, you need to know, you either need to know the data you're working with, or you could kind of cheat and just put depth is 100. And you should be fine.
100 now is the max.
Okay, thank you.
As of PowerShell version 5, they changed the max of the depth parameter, so it's now 100 as a max value. Before that, it was max value for the
Okay. So if your JSON file goes beyond the depth of 100, you've got a bit of a problem. You've probably got more problems than that. Okay, that was JSON. Let's go from here. YAML. So similar to Excel, although YAML hasn't been around quite as long as Excel, they've got a bit more of an excuse. There's no native support within PowerShell for working with YAML. So again, I've gone out to the community. There's a few different modules out there. I've picked one called PowerShell-YAML. It's in the PowerShell gallery, so I can get it in with just a simple install module. It gives me convert from YAML and convert to YAML. So we'll have a quick look at that. Once you've got that, it's pretty straightforward. So if you're not familiar with what YAML looks like, it kind of looks something a bit like this. Once I've imported that module, it's as simple as, again, our friend get content and then pipe it into convert from YAML. And we can start working with that data. Interestingly, in the current, in GitHub for PowerShell, there's a discussion going on about whether they should add this capability into PowerShell 6 or later. So if that's something you need, it could be a good thing to go and say, hey, I really need this. Currently, it looks like they may just put something in the PowerShell gallery rather than actually into PowerShell. But if you want to see different, you can go and comment about that there. If we need to convert to YAML, we can, there's a handy out file parameter on this. So bring this one up. So I'm going to take this data and I'm going to convert it to YAML. And there we go. We've got that data in a YAML format. So it's as simple as that once you've got that. Okay, so I've got a couple more advanced problems. I'm going to pick this one here. So what do you do if someone gives you data you need to work with which doesn't fit any of those formats? Okay. Who likes regex? Hands up. I actually know someone here, I'm not sure I think he's in this session, who does like regex, so if you need some help, I'll introduce you, but I don't like it. It's hard, it's horrible. Okay. In PowerShell version 5, they introduced a new commandlet called convert from string, and this came from some research work done by Microsoft Research based on Flash extract, which is part of Excel. So let's have a quick look at that. Basically, what you do is imagine you've got some data like this, which to the human eye, you can kind of see what the pattern is. Okay, I've got a name, I've got some address data, I've got a phone number. Okay, but you know, if I need to work with that data, I've probably got to come up with a regex for a phone number and different address types. Yeah, I'm already thinking I don't want to do it. What we can do, just bring that data in, is if we create this kind of template of what it looks like. So I know it's a name, it's a location, city, phone number. If I save that as a template and I give it 2 or 3 examples, I think the minimum's 2, then I can take that data, pipe it into convert from string, and tell it, here's my template, this is what the data looks like. Cross your fingers, because occasionally you get slightly weird results with it. But good, it worked. So it's brought that data in, similar to how we've seen everything so far. I didn't have to use any regex, I just gave it a pattern and it did the hard work for me, which I'm lazy, I like other things doing hard work for me. Have I got time for any more? Okay, one more example. Okay, advanced Excel requests. So I will finish up with, let's say you got some data out on the web. Let's have a look at a Wikipedia page. This sort of looks a little bit like an Excel table. How could I get that into Excel? If we go back to that import Excel module, they've got this very handy command called import HTML. If you give it the URL and the index of which of those things on that Wikipedia page you want to bring into Excel, fire that up. One simple command, there's your data in Excel with everything from that Wikipedia page on that table. Never kill a boy on a first date, always good advice. So that's it.
With respect to the embedded commas, which used to be a problem way back when.
Okay.
Not in this, just in Article 1.
So that's it from me. Thank you for coming along. So summary is kind of, where possible, use the built-in commandlets. As we know, they don't always exist. So your next best solution, typically go out to a third-party module in the PowerShell gallery on GitHub, look around, see what's the best thing. Otherwise, you may need to use some basic .NET, so get yourself familiar with how that works to fill in the gap, or for some of these more advanced type scenarios. As I said, all those examples are on my GitHub account. You can find them there. Thank you to our sponsors. Take any questions, or they're already clapping there, so thank you.